The wind was alive that night, a constant voice whispering through steel, rope, and ice. The Arctic didn't roar. It murmured like a god half awake. Thomas Gray leaned over the railing of the HMS Trenchant, watching shards of frozen spray shatter against the hull and scatter like glass across the deck. Somewhere beyond the fog, a dozen ships followed in silent formation, black shadows crawling through a silver mist. Convoy 92 was 3 days out of Iceland, bound for Murmansk, and the North Atlantic was already showing its teeth. The engines hummed beneath his boots, a steady pulse that had become more familiar than his own heartbeat. "You'll freeze your eyes off," came a voice from behind. It was Petty Officer Haynes, wrapped in a tattered greatcoat that looked older than the ship. Gray turned slightly, smiling through the frost. "Trying to see if the sea ever ends." "It doesn't," Haynes said simply. "It just changes its shape to remind us we don't belong here." The wind howled again, and somewhere to starboard a flare flickered briefly, swallowed almost instantly by the fog. Morse light, distant, faint, a signal from the escort destroyer. "Keep course," Gray muttered, half to himself. He knew the rhythm of those flashes as well as he knew his own breath. Every few hours, the destroyers ahead checked positions, making sure none of the merchant ships strayed too far from the convoy line. Drifting meant death. The ocean here didn't forgive wanderers. Below deck, the heat from the engines barely kept the frost from forming on the bulkheads. The men slept in shifts, boots still on, listening to the metallic groans of the hull. Gray sat on his bunk, rubbing his hands over the small tin mug of coffee. Across from him, a young seaman named Perry traced a finger along a photograph pinned above his bed. A woman, a child, and a summer that felt like another lifetime. "You think we'll see sunlight again, Chief?" Perry asked. Gray smiled tiredly. "We'll see something like it. Might not be warm, though." Perry chuckled softly, but it sounded more like breath-fogging glass. Somewhere above them, the sound of footsteps echoed across the deck. The watch had changed. The world outside was nothing but ice and darkness again. At dawn, a faint orange glow crept along the horizon. Not sunlight, but the pale reflection of a world still frozen in night. The convoy stretched out across the ocean, 13 ships now. One had turned back the day before, engine failure. That left 12. 12 floating miracles of iron and willpower, cutting through a sea that didn't want them. The lead destroyer, HMS Keppel, sent another flash signal. "Visibility poor, hold formation, stay silent." Silence. That was the order everyone understood best. No lights, no radio, no smoke beyond what couldn't be helped. The ocean demanded invisibility. Even sound carried too far here. Gray climbed to the bridge, where Commander Wilson stood beside the chart table, pipe clenched tight between his teeth, though it had long gone cold. "Sea's rising," Wilson said without looking. "Barometers dropping fast. We'll have a blow before dusk." Gray nodded. "Better a storm than what's behind it." Wilson gave a faint smile. "That's the truth of it." They didn't say the word U-boat. They didn't need to. Everyone in the North Atlantic felt them before they saw them. Invisible wolves following the convoy through the black water, waiting for the moment when fog and luck turned against them. By evening, the wind began to rise, carrying sleet and spray that stung like gravel. The convoy moved slower now, engines laboring. Through the binoculars, Gray could barely make out the faint shape of the next ship in line, a Norwegian freighter, its deck already buried under a thin crust of ice. "Looks like she's struggling," Haynes said. "They all are," Gray replied. He knew what that meant. One bad swell, and the ice could shift the weight just enough to roll her. The storm hit at midnight. It came from the northwest, a wall of wind and white that erased everything but sound. The horizon disappeared, and the ocean turned to chaos. Waves slammed against the hull, bursting over the deck with the strength of falling cliffs. Gray braced himself against the railing, shouting orders that vanished instantly into the gale. "Secure the lines! Keep the lights down!" The sea didn't care. It tore at everything that dared float. Below, the men fought to keep the engines steady. Haynes slipped across the deck, rope coiled around his arm, securing the lifeboat lines. Gray saw him silhouetted for an instant by lightning, a ghost carved from salt and ice. Then the light vanished, and the world turned black again. Hours passed like minutes, until at last the wind began to ease. The storm retreated as suddenly as it had come. Dawn found the convoy scattered, the horizon empty but for broken ice and drifting debris. Gray leaned against the frozen rail, breath coming in visible clouds. Behind him, Haynes's voice broke the silence. 12 ships when we started." He paused. "How many now, you think?" Gray stared into the endless gray distance where the others should have been. "We'll count when the sea lets us," he said quietly. And then, faintly, through the static of the radio, a single word: "Contact." The storm was gone, but its voice lingered, a low groan rolling across the endless water like an echo of something that didn't want to die. The horizon was colorless again, a smear of gray between sea and sky. Thomas Gray stood on the bridge, salt and frost clinging to his coat, staring through the binoculars at the nothing ahead. The sea was empty, but alive. Small chunks of ice drifted by, knocking against the hull with hollow taps, like knuckles on wood. Haynes came up behind him, face half hidden beneath his hood. "We found 2 ships," he said. "The Norwegian and the tanker, both still moving, but slow. No sign of the Polish freighter." Gray lowered the binoculars. "Any survivors on the water?" "Nothing but barrels and wreckage." Haynes paused, jaw tight. "And 1 lifeboat. Empty." The words hung there, too calm for what they meant. Gray nodded once, quietly. "Keep scanning. If they went under last night, they won't last long out here." The wind had lost its bite, but the cold had a new kind of sharpness now, the kind that seeped into thought. Down below, the engine room throbbed with heat and noise. Steam hissed from valves, the smell of oil thick in the air. Perry was on duty, stripped to his undershirt, sweat freezing on his skin before it could fall. "Temperature's steady," he muttered, checking the gauge. "Pressure good." Collins, the chief engineer, leaned against the pipework. "Keep her breathing, lad. That's all we need." Perry nodded, though his eyes kept flicking to the metal above him, to the faint tapping that sometimes came from outside the hull. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't the sea. Just a soft, distant rhythm, too deliberate to be random. "You hear that?" he asked. Collins frowned. "Hear what?" "That sound, like someone knocking." Collins listened, then shook his head. "You've been awake too long." But Perry kept hearing it, faint, slow, irregular. 3 taps, a pause, then 2, like something alive under the water. On the bridge, the radio sputtered. Static filled the room, then a burst of broken code, a call sign, maybe, cut short. Gray leaned forward. "Say again, this is HMS Trenchant. Repeat your last." Only static answered. Haynes adjusted the dial, frowning. It's close, sir. Within a few miles at most. Gray's pulse quickened. Which direction? Bearings ISO 20, Haynes said. Could be the missing ship. Gray hesitated. The convoy code said, hold position, regroup by daylight. But the voice on the radio wasn't a rule. It was a person. We'll turn 5 degrees starboard, he said. Just enough to check. The Trenchant groaned as the rudder shifted. The compass needle wavered. The rest of the sea didn't notice. An hour later, they found it, what was left of the freighter. It floated half-submerged, its bow torn open, cargo spilling into the sea like bones from a grave. No movement, no life. Gray stood at the rail, heart heavy. Looks like a torpedo hit. Haynes nodded grimly. No explosion? Maybe a dud, Gray said. Or maybe she froze before she could burn. The thought lingered, cold and quiet. Perry climbed up from below, eyes wide as he saw the wreck. God help them, he whispered. Gray didn't answer. He raised his binoculars again, scanning the ice floes drifting nearby. Something about their shape felt wrong. Then he saw it. A lifeboat wedged between 2 slabs of ice, its bow crushed. He could make out movement, slow, weak, but alive. There, he shouted. Lower a boat, now! Haynes and Perry moved fast, ropes creaking, hands numb. The rescue boat hit the water hard, disappearing into mist. Minutes felt like hours. Gray watched the shapes grow smaller, swallowed by the fog. Then a flare went up, a small red spark against the gray sky. They'd found someone. The men hauled the survivor aboard like a ghost. He was barely conscious, wrapped in a soaked greatcoat, eyes wide with cold. His lips moved, but no sound came. They carried him below, wrapped him in blankets, and poured hot tea between his lips. After a while, he started to shake, breath returning. Name? Gray asked gently. The man blinked slowly, focusing on the voice. Mateusz, he whispered, from the Jan Starzinski. Gray exchanged a look with Haynes, the missing Polish freighter. What happened out there? He asked. The man's eyes darted toward the porthole, toward the gray sea outside. Not storm, he said. Something under. His hand trembled as he tried to gesture. We heard tapping. Then water came up fast. No explosion, just pressure. He swallowed hard, like something pushed from below. The words sent a chill through the room colder than the air outside. Haynes shifted uneasily. Submarine? Maybe, Gray said, but no wake, no periscope, nothing on radar. The man shook his head weakly. No machine. The sound, it was too close, like... He hesitated, searching for a word. Like breath. Gray frowned but said nothing. He'd spent too many nights listening to the sea's strange music to doubt a man half dead from it. Rest now, he said. You're safe. But even as he said it, the hull beneath them groaned, low and deep. The same rhythm, 3 taps, a pause, then 2. Everyone froze. The lights flickered once. Perry looked at Gray, face pale. You heard that, sir? Gray nodded slowly. Aye. They all stood listening, breath held. The sea outside was calm again. Too calm. Then came the radio, a burst of static, followed by a new voice, clear and close. Unknown contact, bearing 030, depth unknown. The message repeated, then cut out. Gray looked at Haynes. Tell the engine room to stand by. We're not alone out here. He turned back toward the misty horizon, the sky heavy with ice. Somewhere beneath that gray surface, the ocean was breathing, and it was listening. The sea had turned to glass by morning. There was no wind, no foam, no sound, only the slow pulse of engines and the groaning rhythm of metal against the cold. The Arctic had many moods, but this one was the worst. Silence. The kind that made every man listen harder, as if the ocean were whispering secrets meant for someone else. Thomas Gray stood on the bridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the flat horizon. Nothing. The water stretched forever, smooth as oil, pale, light reflecting like frozen mercury. "Still nothing on sonar," Haynes muttered, his voice barely more than breath. "It's like the sea swallowed its own noise." Gray lowered the binoculars. "It's out there," he said. "Waiting." Haynes gave a nervous smile. "You sound like my grandmother." "Maybe she was smarter than us," Gray replied. "She stayed on land." Down in the mess, Perry sat with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold hours ago. The rescued Pole, Mateus, lay in a bunk nearby, breathing shallowly. His face was gray, eyes moving under the lids as if still watching something in the dark. Every few minutes he twitched, whispering in his own language, fragments that no one could understand. Collins sat beside him, writing notes on a scrap of paper, temperature readings, sonar logs, times of the noises they'd heard. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in patterns. When he finished, he looked at Perry. "Go check the hull," he said. "See if any new frost cracks showed after the storm." Perry nodded, though he hated that job. The lower decks were quiet as a church. He walked along the narrow corridor, flashlight beam cutting across pipes and shadows. The sound of his own boots echoed too loud. When he reached the aft section, he stopped. A low vibration ran through the metal, not the engines, something else. It pulsed, slow and steady, like a heartbeat deep beneath the ship. He pressed his palm to the bulkhead. It was warm. "Chief," he called over the intercom, "you better come hear this." Minutes later, Gray and Collins arrived, Haynes trailing behind. The three men stood in the cramped passage, listening. The sound came again, a faint thud, then another, spaced evenly apart. It wasn't mechanical. "Could be ice pressure," Collins said, though his tone wasn't convinced. Gray shook his head. "Ice doesn't keep rhythm." The thuds grew stronger. Perry stepped back. "Feels like it's right below us." Haynes wiped his hands on his coat. "You think it's one of theirs?" Gray didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Collins. "Cut the engines for 60 seconds. Collins blinked. "Sir?" "Do it. I want to hear what's out there." The order was relayed. A few seconds later, the constant hum of the ship's machinery faded to silence. For the first time since they'd left Iceland, the Trenchant was completely still. The quiet was unbearable. The ship creaked, the hull moaned under the strain, but beneath it, nothing. Then came the sound. Deep, distant, almost musical. A long, hollow moan that rose from the depths and trembled through the steel. It didn't sound like an engine or a whale or any living thing they knew. It sounded like the ocean itself was calling. Gray felt it in his chest more than he heard it. Haynes crossed himself without realizing. "Christ Almighty," he whispered. Collins swallowed hard. "That's pressure resonance, maybe. Thermal layer shift. Has to be." But no one believed it. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Gray gave the order to restart the engines. The vibration returned, steady and human again, and everyone exhaled. "Get us back in convoy formation," he said. "I don't want to drift alone another minute." Haynes moved to the radio, his hands still shaking. Static hissed in reply, then a voice, faint and broken. "This is HMS Keppel. Unknown contact confirmed. 3 miles astern. Submerged." Gray's blood ran cold. "Repeat, Keppel. Confirm bearing." The radio crackled. "Bearing 180. Depth. Changing." The message cut off in static. Gray turned to the helm. "Full ahead. Keep our distance but stay in line." The crew moved faster now, tension thick in the air. Every sound mattered. The creak of a pipe, the drip of condensation, the far-off knock of ice. Perry returned to the mess to check on Mateos. The Pole was awake, staring at the ceiling. "You heard it too," he whispered. Perry hesitated. "Heard what?" Mateos turned his head, eyes wide, unfocused. "The breath. It moves under the hull. It listens. It follows." His voice broke. "You can't see it, but it knows when you're afraid." On deck, fog had rolled in again, thick and heavy. Visibility was down to 50 yards. Gray stood at the rail, scanning the water. He thought he saw something, a ripple where no wave should be. Then another. The sea bulged, subtle but real, as if something vast was passing just below. "Depth reading," he called. Colin's voice came through the intercom. "Fluctuating, sir. Instruments are all over the place." "Define fluctuating." "It's rising, sir. Slowly." Gray's stomach tightened. "Sound the alarm. All hands to stations." The bell rang, echoing through the steel corridors. Men scrambled to positions, boots pounding on decks slick with frost. Perry helped secure hatches, heart hammering. From below, the deep vibration grew stronger, closer. Then, silence again. The kind that makes you realize you've been holding your breath. Nothing happened for almost a minute. Then came the impact. It wasn't an explosion, more like a push. The Trenchant lurched sideways, groaning, the deck tilting as crates slid and ropes snapped. Men shouted, pipes burst overhead. Gray clung to the rail. "Report!" he yelled. Colin's voice came through, thin and strained. "No breach, no contact on sonar. It's just gone." Gray looked out across the fog. The ocean had returned to perfect calm. Even the ice was still. But deep inside the hull, the faint tapping started again. 3 beats, a pause, then 2. This time, it sounded closer. The sea didn't move that morning. It simply existed, flat and pale, a mirror of gray light without reflection. The convoy had reformed, or what was left of it. 7 ships now, crawling east toward Murmansk, through a fog so thick it felt alive. The air smelled of oil and ice. Thomas Gray stood at the bow of the HMS Trenchant, gloved hands resting on the frozen rail. His breath came out in short white ghosts that drifted away before they could form shapes. Somewhere behind him, the ship's bell rang once, a slow, hollow sound that dissolved into the mist. "Depths steady at 90 meters, Haynes reported from the bridge, his voice cracking through the intercom. No movement, but the tapping's back. Gray didn't reply. He'd stopped pretending not to hear it hours ago. It was faint, yes, but constant now. A deep, deliberate rhythm that seemed to echo through the steel. The men avoided speaking about it. They'd begun to walk softly, as if the ocean might be listening through the hull. Perry was on deck duty, clearing ice from the ropes. His hands shook, not from cold, but from something deeper. Every scrape of metal made him flinch. The fog made distance meaningless. Shapes appeared and vanished without warning. The shadow of another ship, a mast, a trick of light. He thought he saw movement below the surface once, like a ripple. But when he leaned closer, it was gone. He muttered a prayer he hadn't used since childhood. You say something, lad? Came a voice. It was Haynes, stepping out of the bridge shadow. Perry shook his head. Just talking to the sea. Haynes nodded. Aye. She listens better than most men. Down below, Collins was studying the depth readings again. The instruments flickered, their needles trembling. The sonar operator, young and pale, wiped frost from the screen. Something's down there, sir, he said. Big, moving slow. Collins leaned closer. The shape was faint, barely visible through the static interference, a blur, wide as a ship, but without form. How deep? He asked. Rising, came the answer. Collins's stomach turned. Get the captain. Gray arrived within moments, boots echoing through the narrow steel corridor. He stared at the sonar screen, its dull green glow flickering across their faces. The shape pulsed, faded, then appeared again. Bearing? 185 closing. Range? 300 yards. Gray's jaw tightened. No visual? None. Water's opaque from sediment. The tapping came again, louder now, enough to vibrate the floor. The operator looked up. That's not echo, sir. It's coming from... He stopped as the sound changed. The rhythm broke, became uneven, almost like breathing. Gray straightened. All engines stop. The ship slowed, the hum fading into stillness. The tapping stopped too. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the faint creak of ice sliding along the hull. Then, deep beneath them, a shadow moved. They could feel it more than see it, a displacement in the water, vast and soundless, passing under the bow like a continent in motion. The pressure gauge jumped, needles shaking wildly. Collins whispered, "It's right beneath us." The hull groaned, plates flexed. Somewhere aft, a rivet popped with a metallic snap. Gray's throat was dry. "Get us moving, now!" The engines roared back to life, vibrating through the decks. The ship surged forward, cutting through fog, but the sea around them shifted, as though something beneath was following. "Speed 8 knots, Haynes called. "Still on us." The sonar lit up again, a massive return, rising faster now. "Depth 60 meters and closing," Collins shouted. 30. "Hard to port," Gray yelled. The ship lurched violently, waves splashing against the deck. Perry clung to the railing, water freezing on his coat. Through the fog he saw it, just for a second, a dark ridge breaking the surface, smooth and curved, like the back of something alive. Then it was gone. "Contact lost!" the sonar operator cried. "It dove!" "Depth? Unknown. Signals scattering." Gray stared at the screen. "Scattering how?" "Like it's everywhere." The tapping returned, faint but multiplied, now from all around, as if the sound had split and surrounded them. The crew froze. The air itself seemed to tighten. Then silence again. The ship's hull pinged once, sharp and metallic, as though struck from outside. Gray's voice was barely audible. "All hands stand by. Maintain course. Do not stop." For hours they pushed east, the fog never lifting. The convoy was a series of ghosts, each ship alone in its own small world of gray. By nightfall, radio contact with 2 vessels had been lost. The others reported no sightings, only interference, sonar static, depth distortions, and strange mechanical echoes that didn't match any known vessel. In the mess, Perry sat with Haynes and Collins. The lamps flickered. "You think it's German tech?" Perry asked. Haynes shook his head. "If it is, they've built something God forgot to mention." Collins stared into his mug. "Maybe it's not what's under the sea that's dangerous," he said softly. "Maybe it's what's been waiting in it too long." They fell silent. The ship groaned again. just the hull settling, but none of them believed that. Later that night, Gray went topside. The air was still, heavy. The moon was hidden behind cloud, but a faint shimmer rolled across the sea like light reflected through glass. He leaned on the rail, looking down. The water was perfectly still, but something glowed faintly below. Not bright, just a dim pulse, like the beat of a distant heart. He watched it until it faded, then turned toward the bridge. As he opened the door, the radio crackled. A voice came through, ragged and broken. "This is Keppel. Contact reacquired. Approaching fast. God help us." Then static. Then nothing. Gray froze. From somewhere deep below, the tapping began again. Not 3 beats this time. Not 2. Just one, steady, unbroken pulse, as if the sea itself had started counting. The radio stayed dead through the night. No signals, no voices, only the soft crackle of static like the whisper of snow falling on water. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the horizon, wrapping every ship in its own private coffin of gray. The men spoke less now. Even the routine orders, course corrections, pressure readings, engine checks, came in whispers. It was as if the ocean itself demanded quiet. Thomas Gray sat alone on the bridge, his gloved hands wrapped around a flask of cold tea. The air smelled of salt and machine oil. The instruments hummed softly, a faint comfort in the silence. Haynes entered without knocking. "Still no word from the Keppel," he said, "and the Norwegians have fallen behind. We've lost visual on half the convoy." Gray didn't look up. "They'll surface again when the fog clears." Haynes hesitated. "Sir, what if it doesn't?" Gray finally met his eyes. "Then we keep going. East doesn't change." Below, Perry was helping Collins check the ballast lines. The lights flickered occasionally, dim yellow bulbs swaying with the ship's motion. Every creak, every sigh of metal sounded too close. "Can't shake the feeling it's under us again," Perry muttered. Collins kept working. "Maybe it is. Maybe it never left." He tapped the gauge gently. "Pressure's climbing." "Could be depth shift," Perry said. "Could be something breathing," Collins replied quietly, and didn't look up. The sound came again then, faint, like knuckles brushing the hull. A long, slow scrape that moved from bow to stern. Both men froze. "It's moving," Perry whispered. Collins nodded, his jaw tight. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." The scraping faded, replaced by the faint rhythmic tapping again, the same strange pulse that had haunted them for days. On the bridge, Haynes watched the depth meter fluctuate. "Something's below," he said. "Depth uncertain." The sonar flickered to life, showing a vast, shapeless mass beneath them. It was bigger than before. Slower. "Bearing?" Gray asked. "Everywhere," Haynes said, his voice breaking. The sound grew stronger, a deep resonance that vibrated through the steel, through their bones, through the air itself. The men clutched their ears as the pitch shifted, a low hum turning into a rumble that made the glass tremble in its frame. "Engines ahead full!" Gray shouted. The ship surged forward, throwing a white wake through the gray water. The fog tore apart in streaks as the bow cut through it. "Stay steady!" Perry ran to the deck as the siren blared. The sea glowed beneath them, faint, bluish light pulsing deep below, spreading in wide circular ripples. It looked alive. "What in God's name is that?" he whispered. The light grew brighter, rising toward the surface. The water bulged, then flattened again, leaving only mist and silence. Then, without warning, the ship listed hard to port. Men tumbled across the deck, crates and ropes flying. The engines howled. "Pressure spike!" Collins yelled through the intercom. "The hull's bending!" The noise rose. Not mechanical, not natural, but something between. A sound like breath turned into thunder. Gray gripped the console. "Hard starboard! Keep her upright!" The rudder screamed as it turned. The ship steadied, creaking but holding. "Any contact on sonar?" "None!" Haynes yelled. "It's gone! No, wait!" The screen flashed. A sudden return, massive, almost vertical. "Depth 20 meters!" Gray's heart pounded. "That's right below us!" The water exploded upward, a column of mist and spray taller than the mast. For a moment, the ship lifted, suspended on a swell that wasn't a wave. Perry fell to his knees, staring down into the water. For the first time, he saw it, not clearly, not enough to name it, but enough to know it was real. A dark curve, immense and slow, rolling beneath them before sinking back into the depths. It wasn't a shape built by hands or reason. It was older, quieter, patient. Then it was gone, leaving only the trembling of the hull and the sound of their own breaths. When the sea calmed, no one spoke for a long time. The fog began to thin at last, revealing faint outlines of icebergs in the distance, and, far ahead, the glow of northern light bleeding across the horizon. "Murmansk," Haynes said softly. Gray didn't answer. He just stared at the horizon, the ghost of light reflecting in his eyes. "Signal the others," he said finally, "if any are left." Haynes sent the call. Only 2 ships answered. By the next evening, Trenchant limped into port, her hull scarred, her crew hollow-eyed, her decks streaked with salt and ice. No one asked what had happened at sea. They said nothing about the sound, or the tapping, or the light. The official report called it severe weather and navigational anomalies. The survivors signed their names beneath the line and went home. Months later, when the war was nearly done, Thomas Gray stood on the docks of Scapa Flow, watching another convoy depart. The sea was calm, the air sharp with the smell of diesel. He lit a cigarette, though he barely smoked. Haynes joined him, hands in his coat pockets. "Still thinking about it?" he asked. Gray didn't answer at first. "Sometimes at night, I hear it," he said finally. "The sound, the way it echoed through the steel, like the ocean breathing." Haynes nodded slowly. "You think it was real?" Gray exhaled a thin cloud of smoke, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Everything out there is real," he said. "We just don't have names for it yet." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of salt and iron. The convoy disappeared into the haze. Gray turned to go, but paused, looking back once more at the endless gray water. For just a heartbeat, he thought he heard it again. Faint, distant, 3 slow taps against the pier. He stood there listening until it stopped. Then he smiled, a small, tired smile, and walked away. The sea stayed silent, but it never slept.